If there are things that are causing chaos in your home environment, it's going to affect your relationship.
How do guys become emotionally available and vulnerable, but then also still play that like traditional masculine role within a relationship?
You don't owe anybody a relationship. And if somebody wants you to play a role that you don't want to play, you don't have to be in that relationship. Everybody deserves love. Everybody deserves to be valued for who they are, not just for what they do.
What would be some like red flags and green flags that like guys should be looking out for when they're looking to pursue a relationship with a woman?
Having basic stability helps set a relationship up for success. These are skills and tools that you have to learn, but everybody has to learn.
Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show with your host, Eric. Join him on the journey where we explore transformative ideas, confront challenges, and discover new perspectives. Together, let's elevate the mindset and transform your personal and business success. So whether you're seeking motivation, practical advice, or a fresh perspective, you've come to the right place. Join Eric on the Minds Unleashed show, and let's dive in together to empower your mind and unleash freedom.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Minds Unleashed show. I'm your host, Eric. As always, if you get value out of this podcast, please share it with a friend. And don't forget to subscribe on YouTube and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify and Apple. I truly appreciate it. All right, let's get into today's show. I'm so grateful to introduce you to today's guest, Kristal Desantis. Kristal is a licensed therapist specializing in marriage, family, relationships with an emphasis on men's issues. Please note that the thoughts and opinions of Kristal are not medical or health advice, and please consult a professional specific for your needs. She is a therapist, not your therapist. Welcome to the show, Kristal.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Awesome. It's a pleasure to have you. And so I kind of love to start off with kind of going through your key pillars for a successful relationship, and safety is the most important one from your perspective. So how would men know if they are providing an environment of safety to their partner or not?
Yeah. So that is something I, as a woman, as a female therapist, one of the things I saw between my couples and clients, my conversations with them is women are so aware of being safe or unsafe in the world. And that also translates to how they interact with their partner. And one of the things I noticed is men really wanted to make their partners feel safe, but, there's a different experience of, what safety means. And so that's part of why I wanted to really break it down in my book. So the first chapter is on safety, but I divide it into 4 different categories. And so, safety is this big, huge concept. And I've, like, what does it mean to be a safe man? How do I know if I'm showing up safely? How do I know if my partner feels safe with me? So these 4, what I call like the 4 S's of safety, are really kind of these practical, tangible ways that you can show up as a safe person and help co-create a place of safety in your relationship so that your partner can feel safe with you.
What are those 4 S's?
Yeah. So the first one is self-awareness. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of showing up safely is you understand, why you're in a relationship, first of all, and then what the impact of your previous relationships or your past is on the way that you're showing up in this one, which again is that kind of basic, being aware of who you are and your impact on the world, extending that to how are you showing up in your relationship. Because sometimes, again, a lot of hurt happens when people are acting in ways that they're not aware of, right? And so there might be like, I'm not meaning to hurt my partner. I don't know why they keep getting hurt. And so that's really that self-awareness, self-reflection piece of, maybe the way you lash out and it's coming from a place of you're trying to defend yourself, you're trying to protect yourself. But the effect is that, it makes your partner not feel safe with you. So again, there's no judgment, but simply kind of knowing yourself, knowing what you need in a relationship and knowing how the ways you show up affect your partner helps to create a sense of safety in the relationship. So that's step 1, self-awareness. The second S of safety is stability, which is kind of more of the practical life skills, because so often what I saw with couples is, and this is kind of a saying that's become popularized, but roommate issues becoming relationship issues, right? So basic conversations about cleanliness, about finances, about chores. When those things are not stable in a relationship, a lot of energy and time in a couple can be spent on just basic stability stuff. And so that was one of the things I wanted to name, that, if there are things that are causing chaos in your home environment, it's going to affect your relationship. So the more stable you can create, the more secure and stable your home environment is, the more safe and secure your partner and your relationship will feel. I mean, it's more of a practical thing. The third one is self-regulation, so the last two, so self-regulation and self-expression are the last two S's of safety. And those are really the communication and conflict skills. So, when people are in conflict, often what makes conflict spiral and feel unproductive is when people just start getting really activated and their bodies are starting to take over, and it becomes that kind of fight or flight response. And so the conflict is no longer really about solving an issue. It becomes more of that, like, we're just reacting to each other. There's not really a lot of problem solving happening because we're both so angry at this point. And now we're just trying to win, or we're just trying to make it stop, right? I just want you to stop talking because I want to prove my point. And so that's where the self-regulation piece comes in, of knowing, like, okay, if I'm getting too upset, do I need to say, hold on, let me take a break, or this is a really sensitive topic for me. We're going to have to go slow through this. Whatever you can do to self-regulate throughout conflict is going to make your relationship feel like a safer place to be, right? Because that you can have difficult, even conflict type conversations, but they can happen in a safe way. So nobody gets triggered and we don't have this big blow up and then our bodies don't feel good afterwards. And then the self-expression, again, how can you, I say it in my book, I talk about how can you make sure your message doesn't get lost in your delivery, right? Make sure that the message that you're trying to transmit actually comes across in the way that you mean it. And sometimes that's about expanding your vocabulary or using different language, maybe speaking in a more emotional way, just so that the self-expression is a little bit more effective. And again, all of those things make a relationship feel like a safer place to be, where people know who they are, they know why they're there, they know their own strengths and weaknesses, they have basic life skills, so we don't need to argue about those. And then we're able to handle conflict and communication in a way that feels connective and safe. And again, might not be perfect, but, we have a sense of co-created safety in the relationship.
Yeah, it sounds like a lot of this is just foundational key elements, because like if you can get that all aligned and agreed upon, or at least in a place of you understand each other's position, then I feel like all the other issues almost become a lot easier to kind of handle and manage.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I'm curious, like, I think self-awareness is a really key one. Sometimes I find myself to be maybe hyper self-aware. But I guess I'm curious, what would you say to guys that like don't have that self-awareness? How would they become more self-aware so that they can self-regulate and self-express and communicate in a better way, so that they're not like lashing out or raising their voice or not delivering their message well?
Yeah. And again, I'm a therapist, but this is where going to therapy is a place where you can do that, because a lot of self-awareness, I know it's self-awareness. So you think, okay, maybe I'll just lock myself in a room and like investigate myself a little bit, which that could be part of it, right? Reading books on your own, doing some research. But a lot of feedback about who we are comes when we are in interactions with other people, right? Because you might think like, or, anybody might think like, gosh, I'm like a really smart person. And then you go out in the world and you try to have a conversation and you're like, oh, that didn't go the way I thought it was going to go. Or, there's just so much information that comes in relationship. And so, sure, you can go and talk to your friends if you have a good friend group and say, hey, what's something that I should know about me that you don't think I know? in the book, I have what's called the Johari window of self-awareness, where it's like things I know about me and other people know about me, things I know about me that other people don't know about me, things other people know about me that I don't know about me, and then things that nobody knows. And so being able to expand like what I know about me and reduce what other people know about me that I don't know about me is one of those big key things of self-awareness. And having, ideally, if you have friends that can give you that feedback of like, yes, we all know this about you. And like, somebody's got to be the one to tell you, like, which is great, but not everybody has those, relationships in their life. Or maybe there's, past hurt or something that they just can't hear it from those people, right? It's like maybe your mom or your dad, they would tell you the truth, but you just can't hear it from them. Or your boss or your brother or whatever. So going to a therapist and having a neutral person who's experiencing you for the first time, being able to name that to you, like, hey, do you notice that, I don't know, you're very guarded when you talk about this topic? Or do you notice that, when you talk about your relationship with blank, you kind of breeze over that, and so that's what a good therapist can do, is just hold up a mirror of like, hey, do you know this about yourself? And then do you know why it's there? Do you know why you developed that skill? And just kind of eliciting a environment of curiosity so that you can self-reflect and be like, I didn't know that about myself. I wonder why I do that. And that leads to more self-awareness.
The other aspect I think that is also important is self-reflection, because I think self-reflection allows you to play back those scenarios or situations like almost like in your head and be like, did I like say that wrong? Or maybe I didn't articulate my question incorrectly. So I think that could be one way. I guess, like, what would you say to the guy that, doesn't want to talk to a therapist at the moment, but still wants to like make a, step forward in the right direction? Like, I guess, books and podcasts are definitely a good starting place. I think a therapist helps you be accountable for the things that you need to work on, right? Because or you could try to have your friend hold you accountable, but a therapist will be a lot more educated in these areas.
Yeah. And I totally want to validate. I mean, you could, a therapist, or you could go to a coach. You have a good friend, if you have a mentor, just somebody who can give you that feedback so you can hear it, right? Because I think there's also something, like you said, I mean, people can be too self-reflective where then it becomes kind of self-criticism and you can kind of almost wind yourself into a little ball. So having somebody outside of yourself to say, if you're like, oh my gosh, I just like, I'm overthinking the way I said that, or did that come out wrong? And that they can actually validate for you, like, no, that actually landed on me fine. Or no, that was, you did great. Or here's what I appreciated about the way you said that. And that's also where it can be a positive feedback loop as well, right? Is having somebody who will hold you accountable, but also somebody who is generous with validation and encouragement and positive self-reflection as well.
Yeah. And I think many guys don't get that positive reinforcement, or I guess a compliment would be what comes to mind, where like we don't like recognize that like we're actually doing all these things. We're just so focused on like what we're not doing or where we're sucking at, and like maybe that criticism, in our mind comes into play. What would you say to like emotionally like regulate yourself so like you are showing up better for your partner? Because I know, guys like, testosterone, ego, all plays factors, and like those can overtake you as a guy. And so what are some like exercises or techniques you could kind of do to emotionally regulate?
Yeah. Sometimes I talk about like having an inner critic, right? It's obviously not something I just came up with, but, having an inner critic, right? Then I always say like, well, a good practice is develop an inner cheerleader as well, right? So if you have like this, coach voice that shows up in your head that when you mess up, it's very present and it's like, here's what you did wrong. is can you also cultivate like, okay, now can I hear from the cheerleader? you know, and just kind of give you a little bit of balance in the feedback that you're telling yourself. So it's not just all criticism. Almost like playing devil's advocate with yourself a little bit, giving yourself the same kind of generosity and of compassion that you would give to a friend, which is sometimes difficult because if you're like, well, you know, me and my friends, we give each other crap all the time. It's like, okay, well, what's underneath that expression? Like, isn't there care under that? Like, you know, when you're even if it comes out as kind of like, you know, ribbing or joking, underneath that is a real expression of care. And so being able to kind of give that to yourself in a slightly different way than just punishment, right? So there's like, again, if we go back to basic psychology of, you know, positive versus negative reinforcement, like negative reinforcement is kind of punishment based, whereas positive reinforcement is reward based. And, you know, if we go back to these like really old research studies, but is kind of foundational to psychology, is positive reinforcement is always more effective, right? Punishment is effective because it's, you know, nobody likes pain. Nobody wants to be punished. But when it comes to long-term change, positive reinforcement is always going to be the more effective one in the long run. So just reminding that to yourself, if you're being hard on yourself, it's like, wait, it's more effective to be like, and here's what you did well.
Yeah. I mean, speaking from my own experience, I struggle with that one. Like the inner cheerleader is probably at like 2%, where the inner critic is like 98%. And it's always the inner critic that's overtaking everything. And I actually now talk to a therapist. So several episodes before I talked to one and she asked me like, are you talking to one? And I said no. And it kind of made me curious. And she actually tries to point out like the things I am doing well. And it's interesting because like, I still struggle to accept that. It's something I'm still like, yeah, but couldn't that be a little bit better? Or what about this? Right. Where I almost play that devil's advocate of the critic. So I think it's a very important skill to develop the two sides of the critic and the cheerleader, because like you truly have to give yourself credit, right? Because you do put a lot of load and stress on yourself mentally and emotionally. And so I think you definitely have to recognize that you have to still be a cheerleader. And I like that analogy.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we need both.
And so I'm curious, you know, we've talked about like kind of that emotional kind of stability, but then I also want to kind of balance that out with like, there's a lot of maybe traditional masculine roles that women want men to take on. So what's your thought around like how do guys become emotionally available and vulnerable, but then also still play that like traditional masculine role within a relationship?
So I think this is a really, you know, tricky piece of the conversation. But I do talk about this in my book of like, okay, so first things first, which is not all women are healthy. Right. And so I do think that sometimes men do get put into this like double bind because they're like, on one hand, I'm hearing that women want vulnerable men. And then on the other hand, I'm hearing that these women are like, if he's not 6'5" in a finance, I'm not dating him. So it's like, where do we go? Right. So I think that's also where it's like caveat, not every woman is going to be a healthy partner. Which is why, you know, if you can kind of develop your own sense of what is it that you're looking to play, which is part of that self-awareness, like what kind of relationship do you want, right? Maybe you don't really want a woman that's just going to be like, just pay my bills and please don't cry in front of me. Maybe that's not the relationship you want. And so that's also something to kind of start. And, you know, I really want to validate for men as well as, you know, I think women have been getting this message for a long time, but you know, you don't owe anybody a relationship, right? And if somebody wants you to play a role that you don't want to play, you don't have to be in that relationship, right? And so that's also where kind of starting with what kind of partner do you want to be? And is that based on like, well, I have to live up to this certain role or otherwise I'm going to be, you know, I'm not going to, I don't know, fulfill some kind of man script? Or is it genuinely like, when you think about what makes you feel safe, connected, fulfilled in a relationship, what does that actually look like for you? Right? So, yeah, I always want to validate that.
I truly love actually that perspective. But it also highlights the key for the self-awareness aspect, right? And I think that seems like that first step towards, your kind of journey of, getting to a better place, like from a relationship perspective and like where to be as a partner. And so is there kind of like anything else, I think besides like what role do you want to play? Is there any other kind of like thoughts you have around a guy, maybe wanting to be, in that role, but also trying to make sure he's still like, emotionally available?
In the beginning of my book, I talk about the 3 P's of masculinity that a lot of men have, been told that this is what a traditionally masculine man, this is what men's jobs are, is to be a protector, be a provider, and be a procreator, right? You got to protect your woman, so you got to be strong physically. You got to provide for your family, so you got to have a good job, and you got to be able to procreate, which means, you should be ready to go at all times if your wife's like, hey, I want another baby. Which, in a lot of ways has led to this like performance pressure on men, like on all these different aspects, right? So it can lead to some body image issues for men that are like, if I don't want to go pick a fight with the biggest guy just to prove to my girl that, like I don't want to get beat up like that. And then providing, right? Again, like we don't have any control over the job market or the economy. And so, there are men that are like, well, damn, if I don't have a 6-figure job, do I even deserve a girlfriend? And, that's a shame because, everybody deserves love. Everybody deserves to be valued for who they are, not just for what they do. And so that's also what I really want to speak to. And there are lots of men that are like, I don't want to just like, I've seen this in couples where they're like, I don't want to just give my wife as many babies as she wants if I don't feel like I can be present as a father. Or we can't afford that. Like, I don't want just to be working all day and not being able to spend time with my kids. I want to be a present parent. And so I think that's really why I talk about the modern man is you have more options now than the traditional man did. Right. And the traditional man, a lot of it was just about survival, right? If you weren't physically strong, I mean, you would, get run over and die. If you couldn't provide for your family, well, they would all starve. Like, but now I think really emphasizing that in the same way that a modern woman has more options, so does the modern man. And so really kind of, sure, having the traditional, whatever that means to you, but also recognizing that there are more options out there and you can like, the world is your oyster. So yeah, making sure that you know what you want before going out there and just following a script is going to be really important.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And it's those 3 Ps that you mentioned, I think adds like so much like stress and pressure for a guy before he even like enters into a relationship, right? Like, cause it's like, for me, I'm not the tallest guy, right? So, there's that aspect. And then it's like, right, you said like the job market, right? Like so many people have been laid off from their careers, like that causes a lot of stress and, a guy's ability to do that providing. So it's very interesting to see. It's like, you already have these like, predetermined stressors before you even have, tried to, go talk to a girl. So,
yeah. And this is where, again, like being able to expand your definition of protection, right? Is, sure, you might not want to pick a fight with, any guy that you run into, but is that really the kind of protection that a healthy woman would want from you? Maybe she wants emotional protection, right? Same thing with providing. Like maybe she's an equal partner. So she's like, hey, if we need if I need to support us financially while you go back to school, like I'm happy to do that because, you provide me with love and laughter and fun and, encouragement and joy. Like you bring so much value. And then that's really where it becomes less of like, okay, if you're not up to par, you're discarded for the next one, which I think, like you said, it brings a lot of insecurity of like, well, if I'm not checking these boxes, do I deserve a relationship or am I going to be successful in a relationship? It's not good for anybody's mental health to feel like that. Right.
No. And then speaking of like, I guess the dating aspect. So what would be some like red flags and green flags that like guys should be looking out for when they're looking to pursue a relationship with a woman?
It's really kind of the same things, right? Is when a woman is, or a potential dating prospect is unaware or doesn't seem to care about their impact on you. So, showing up late with no care, right? Or during the date, if they're not asking you any questions or they're not, being aware of your experience, that could also be a red flag, right? And so that's like, okay. And same thing, looking out for stability, right? Is she, and I put in my book, like, does she get totally wasted on the first date? Is there some like chaotic element to her life that you start to notice like, oh, that's, again, having basic stability helps set a relationship up for success, right? If somebody's like, yeah, I'm on a date with you, but, I'm about to head off to this other country and, maybe I'm going to do this and maybe I'm going to do that. Like, again, doesn't mean that they're a bad person. They might be in a very fantastic place in their life, but are they ready to be in yours? Right. So those are kind of the same thing. Like, how do they handle conflict? Are they understanding? Are they able to self-regulate? Do they just fly off the handle? All the same things, that are kind of, precursors of creating safety in a relationship. You just go for either gender.
Yeah. And I almost think of like stress tests as like what comes to mind when you talk about this. It's, you always see is like, how do you treat the waiter at the restaurant, right? It's a great test. Another one that comes to mind is traveling. Traveling can be so stressful and you're in a completely different area. You're trying to figure out what to do, sleep, like everything becomes a lot more stressful. And so I think traveling can be a great kind of stress test on the relationship. Do you have any other ideas or examples on like what will be some good environments or kind of like see how a person responds? Like, I know conflict is a very common theme you've mentioned.
A thing that I always encourage people to know for themselves so that they can know for another person is this person dating for companionship or are they on a path to partnership? Because again, the word dating is a big word. Some people are dating casually and just having fun and like, I'm just looking for a companion at this stage of life. And there are other people that are like, I'm looking for my life partner, right? And so I'm really on a path to partnership. And, there's reasons why people are in both and, whatever, but there is a huge difference, again, as a marriage and family therapist, between the skills that make you necessarily a good dater are completely different than the skills that, or not completely, but there is a different set of skills that makes you a good life partner. And a lot of the kind of unsexy things to talk about, like finances, children, basic life, like education, these kinds, family of origin, family cultures, those things really matter in the long run. But, if you're just dating for companionship, who cares if, you want to have 3 children or 4 or 5, if you're just like, I don't know, I'm just dating because I want to go hang out. Right. And so being able to articulate, like, where are you at in this period of your life? Are you looking for, something short, something that kind of fits into your life? Or are you looking for something that you can build a life with?
Yeah, I love how you said that. I know you mentioned like the unsexy things and like finances and children. Like, what else comes to mind when, you're going down that path of partnership versus like, companionship?
So religion is one. That's a big one. Even, I don't know, this this show is coming up for me, Love is Blind. I don't know if you've seen this show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But,
yep.
It's like there's one couple and I don't know. I don't want to spoil the show, so you can cut this part out if you need to. But, the things that matter when you're building a life with someone. So there are some people that they really want to stay at home and spend time with their children. When the kids are little, they really want to be a stay-at-home parent. but other people, they want to not have that arrangement, right? And so being able to be honest about that, same thing. I mean, even something like public or private school. I've had people that are, in couples that are about to have their first child that have really strong feelings about this, but they've never talked about it until like baby is coming. Right. And so again, I think just a lot of this goes back to when you are examining what you want in your life, can you articulate what you want that life to look like in a way that would give somebody else kind of the informed consent of whether or not they want to join that life with you, or that they can also see themselves in that life.
I'm curious, so when you mentioned Love is Blind, do you watch that show, for example, and try to make guesses on which relationships turn out?
Yeah, I love, again, some of it is just, there are some shows I'm like, I can't. It's just, overproduced and it's edited all up the, up and down the wazoo. But I'm just fascinated by human interactions and relationship dynamics. So yeah, I'll watch those shows and, it's always fascinating, like market research a little bit.
Yeah. It's almost like you have an edge or something, or, because I think Love is Blind is a great example, because it kind of, a lot of dating shows always starts with the physical aspect. So this one removes that, obviously. And so they try to build on that. And so I feel like if I was in your shoes, I'd be getting a, bracket out or something, writing everyone's name down, picking who's the winner or something.
Yeah. It is really fascinating. I mean, the one that I'm just finished watching right now is the UK version, which is just, a thing that makes a huge difference is all of those contestants are just slightly older. They're in their 30s versus their 20s, which the American version tends to be in their 20s. And so again, that much more time to know who they are in life makes a huge difference in the way that they approach some of these conversations, right? It goes back to actually looking at what life would look like together, as opposed to what do you like to do for fun on the weekends, which is valid.
We talked a lot about guy related things. So I'm curious, do you have any tips on how you can ensure that your partner feels wanted and admired, that women can do that for men? Because I've heard you say that's a, key thing.
Yeah. Again, I think like you mentioned earlier, the gap between how much maybe validation and compliments men get versus what women get. A lot of women don't know. I've heard from a lot of men that they don't think that women understand how few compliments and how little validation they get. Because that's often not women's experience. I mean, I was out with a friend last night and a complete stranger, another woman, stopped her and was like, "Oh my God, your dress is amazing." It's like, when is the last time that a random dude stopped you on the street and was like, "Dude, that shirt, those shoes, excellent." Yeah.
Never. Right.
Right. So I think just, I guess highlighting for women how important it is, that, if you feel proud of your partner or if you admire them, that those sentiments actually get then shared. I have a little exercise that I ask couples to do, which is, validate a point of pride for each other every day, express care for a moment of pain, and then be curious about each other's pleasurable experiences. So it's pride, pain, and pleasure. I like to call it my little heartbeat exercise because, if we're talking about increasing emotional connection, it's sometimes the emotional connection is flatlined. And so this is kind of the let's get it back. And I've seen that make such a huge difference. Even just asking, your partner, hey, what were you proud of today? What did you do for yourself that made you proud? And this is also where, going back to our earlier conversation, our earlier piece of, it also forces you then to talk to your inner cheerleader rather than your critic, right? Because if I'm like, "Hey, Eric, what's something that made you proud over the last week?"
I would say that I made it to the gym 4 days strictly in a row. Usually I do 2 days, day off, 2 days, but I'll say like that's like the one of the first things that comes to mind.
Okay. Yeah. So again, like that would give somebody the opportunity to be like, holy crap, man, that's amazing. Great job. Like I know I like making it 4 days in a row to the gym is hard work. It takes dedication. It takes pushing through pain. It takes holding yourself accountable. So, good for you for kind of hitting that milestone. Great job. Right. And so having a culture where you can have that in a partnership, it's just, it's so powerful.
I also think it's like you don't recognize those like small little things that like, someone else might see and be like, oh yeah, I really like that you did do that, right? Granted, waking up early in the morning is also not easy, or it could impact your partner's sleeping as well. But at the same time, like they might see them like, oh, I want to wake up early and go for a walk or something, right? So that was me focusing on the critic and versus the cheerleader side.
Well, and that's where, again, it's so interesting because what immediately came up for me when you said that is that could also be a point where like, if let's say by day 3 or day 4, you're like very aware that like, oh gosh, I'm making kind of noise in the morning. I hope my partner's not mad at me. Or maybe you come home from the gym and, she's kind of quiet or busy and you tell yourself like, oh, she's upset because I woke her up early again. Now this is the 3rd or 4th day in a row. So having this moment where she could instead say like, no, I'm so proud of you. Like, I don't even notice in the morning when you get up because I'm totally, dead to the world, which I'm sure you would want to be like, asleep. So the fact that you get up and you make yourself do that, like, I'm really proud of you. That's amazing. I'm totally asleep. I can't hear anything. Could also be a point to kind of alleviate that. Oh, okay. So you're not upset when I get up and go. And like, you're actually proud of me for that. And like you said, oh, maybe you actually admire that about me. And so that feels good as well. And so, yeah, just having this kind of feedback loop of pride and validation is so important.
I also think it alleviates like maybe stress and anxiety that's very prevalent in, people in their 20s and 30s, right? Or those like thoughts, like you mentioned, where it's like, oh, are they annoyed with me because I got up earlier? Or did their alarm clock wake me up as well? But in reality, it's like, no. So I think that does help alleviate a lot of stress, which in turn builds like that, kind of safety and stability and everything else we kind of talked about in the beginning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then the other two, parts of that exercise is being able to ask each other about anything painful. Which, sometimes pain can be a touchy subject when it comes to couples or when it comes to sharing your experience. It can feel kind of vulnerable. But that's also where reminding yourself that in a good relationship, your partner cares about your pain and cares about that experience. And they can offer like, either support or empathy or whatever, maybe the pain isn't emotional. Maybe it's, I went to the gym 4 days in a row and now my body is aching and, I can't walk downstairs well. And that's where, again, a partner could be like, oh my gosh, well, I'm sorry that hurt. Everything hurts. Like, what do you need? Right. And they can just offer some support or just empathy. Right. And then pleasure, which is, again, another thing in couples that when it comes to talking about pleasure, having, and this is also kind of coming back to what I heard from a lot of men, that's important for them in a relationship to feel desired is to feel desired sexually, and to feel attractive to their partner. Like that's a very important kind of marker of like, okay, am I, does my partner still desire me? Am I still attractive to them? And so normalizing conversations about pleasure and, so it's not an awkward, like heavy conversation when you talk about sex or you talk about pleasure. Instead, it's just one of those things you check in with, like, what gave you pleasure today? And maybe today it might be something like, I really enjoyed what we did this morning. Or it could be, I had a great walk, or I reach this level in this game. And like, there's so many ways that we could get pleasure. But just having it be okay to talk about it and share what gives you pleasure can also give your partner an insight into like what makes you happy, what makes you tick.
I think it also gives you like that ability to recognize the things that like you might not realize as well, right? Is like, oh, did this small thing like actually mean more to them, but may not realize that, right? Like just going for a walk you mentioned, or you up leveled in your game or something like that, or you just finished a book or TV show. And so I think that open communication channel allows for you to gain insight into kind of each other and kind of where they're at. So I think it's like a great kind of exercise, but it seems silly where it's like you have to like implement these exercises. But I think so many people maybe you just don't talk about it, or you kind of swipe it under the rug like mentally, and then it just builds and builds and builds, and then it becomes an emotionally stressful situation. Instead of these exercises sound like they're almost there to prevent those.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that is something I'm glad we're talking about all of this stuff, because I think one thing that also hurts both men and women, but I feel like men sometimes get like burdened by this idea that like you're supposed to just be magically good at relationships somehow, that like when you get a girlfriend, like you'll be magically the best mind reader in the world. And, somehow it'll be like you'll get the boyfriend husband upgrade, and, and it's like, it's not how it happens. Like these are skills and tools that you have to learn, but everybody has to learn. Right. And so, that's something I always want to validate, is like, just because relationships and we're wired for connection, it feels natural, doesn't mean that we're naturally good at it. Right. And so that's kind of a distinction. It's like, give yourself the skills and tools you need to set yourself up for success from day one, even before you get in a relationship, so that you don't end up feeling, negative or critical for yourself, or you're like, why am I not getting it? Maybe I'm not meant to be in love, or maybe I don't deserve it, or whatever negative script you have. And sometimes it might just be like, well, you don't have the skills, but those can be learned. And that's, that's a process that you have control over, you can do. Set yourself up for success from day one. Have those structures there to keep you on track. And don't fall for the myth of the magical mind reading man that will magically be good at relationships.
Yeah. And I think the other thing that I've kind of taken away from listening to you as well is like the things that guys should be working on is like the same thing that like women should be working on when they like kind of come together in a relationship, which I guess is something like I kind of never really recognized or thought about. And so I'm curious, like when a woman is going into the dating world and seeking out a guy for partnership, like, is there anything that they should be like doing to kind of attract that individual? Maybe one comes to mind is like, what if they don't want to use like dating apps, right? That's a very common topic of like, should I use them? Should I not? Should I go into public areas? So I'm curious your thoughts.
You're right. It's the same for both. And for women, what I would say is, there's a lot of messages out there about men. When I say out there, I mean like on social media, on, online, all this. And so that's the thing that I often caution women is, find narratives of good men. Remind yourselves, because again, this is with women's emphasis on safety sometimes, and I can speak to my own experience as well, is, being kind of very self-protective and being very quick to say, oh, no, not it. And so being a little bit more, I guess, hopeful, open, vulnerable, but that doesn't mean unboundaried, right? So like have your boundaries, but also be open to the possibility that men are human. They're going to make mistakes, and that, having a little bit more of a generous and compassionate mindset. And I would say on both sides, right? But that's something that I do talk about with women a lot, is like, there are lots of messages out there that don't allow for men's humanity to show up, you know, when it comes to dating and just, being human. So, when you are connected with your own humanity as well, then you're more willing to hold space for somebody else's. So again, at the end of the day, I think it kind of goes back to both. Like, if you're critical on yourself, you're probably going to be critical on somebody else. If you are not boundaries with yourself, you're probably going to be worried about somebody else, not honoring your boundaries. And so really just, being able to know that you can be open-hearted and still have a strong core.
Yeah, I love that perspective too. You said about the narratives too, because I think it's also like, if you are seeking out bad narratives, then you might be finding that come true in like your partner, right? So if you're seeking out something bad, you might find something bad. Whereas if you seek out something good, you might find something good. And I think the other thing that you mentioned too, I think, is that women are really good at knowing when they're safe and unsafe. And so like almost like following that like vibe and energy, like right off the get-go, is probably a good way to kind of protect themselves. You're like, does this guy give me, the ick or something? Or is he, giving me, a warmer feeling? And I think just like that gut feeling could probably help easily make the next couple of dates either stop or keep going in the right direction.
Yeah. And that's such an interesting thing too, because that's also, in my work with individuals and women individuals is, sometimes when, again, going back to maybe more like the traditional psychotherapy of, investigating the impact of your childhood and trauma and all of that is, sometimes safety feels unfamiliar if you've grown up with chaos. Right. And so I think that's also something, of like doing your own healing so that you can actually recognize safety when it shows up to you, and you don't miss, like you said, you don't mistake an ick for something that might be an ick might not be not safe. It might be an ick. And what even is that? Right. Or there's something that you might be like, oh, but I really like it. But when you actually check in with yourself, it's actually very unsafe. Right. And so that's also the other thing of like true safety versus familiarity.
I think that's a good point to call out, because if you grow up in an environment of chaos, you might try to be seeking out that chaos. Whereas like when you are safe and you keep living in a safe environment, I don't know why, but it's like you feel like you want like a little bit of like the chaos is like that familiarity. And I think that's a good way to kind of talk about those two key areas.
There's work on both sides. And I think at the end of the day, you attract people who are at a similar stage of growth, right? And so the more kind of attuned you can get to who you are, what you need, because even that, like when you get to a place where you realize like, oh, chaos isn't attractive to me anymore, then you just won't be attracted to those people that are unsafe in that way, right? And then you will actually be attracted to people that are safe. And I would say this goes for both men and women, because I've worked with some men who are like, God, but I was, I keep falling for these women that, they seem to have a lot of chaos in their life. And that's where it's like, wait, hold on, let's work on why that's attractive to you. Because maybe if you do your own work, that kind of chaos is not going to be attractive to you anymore, right? It might still be familiar. You might still be like, oh yeah, because, my mom was chaotic, or, I grew up in a chaotic home, or I saw my parents be chaotic with each other. So I know that pattern. But when I actually reflect on what is it I want in life or in a partner, I actually don't want a chaotic person. So that's not even attractive to me anymore.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very key point to kind of articulate. And so I'd love to now get into my signature question, which will be the question I ask every guest. And it's what I say is a topic I've battled in my head, which is, what is happiness and what is kind of your life's purpose? And I think a lot of people ask themselves that question. And so I'm curious, how would you kind of describe happiness and purpose in your own kind of definition?
I guess what immediately came up to me when you were saying that is, happiness feels like enough. And I think a lot of unhappiness comes from that sense that we're not enough. Like, I'm not enough. I don't have enough. I'm not doing enough. And so sometimes just, happiness feels like enough. I did enough today. I'm enough, just like peace. And then the life's purpose thing, that is such a fascinating thing because I want to, on the cover of my book, I have a compass. And part of, I think, the message with that is, being open to recalibration, right? That your life's purpose, we always need a purpose, but sometimes that can be, I guess, how do I want to say this? Is you can have like an overarching purpose that feels really powerful, but it can sometimes also be limiting, right? If you're like, that's the direction I'm going and I'm not going to recalibrate, like you're going to eventually end up off course. And so kind of opening space for life's purpose to be fluid, right? Like maybe what your life's purpose was when you were 20 is not going to be what it is when you're 30. And it's not going to be what it is when you're 40 or 50 or, it's like allowing that to change. But it gives you a direction to head, right? It gives you a North Star. It gives you a north.
So like, how did you know that you had like a gift and like a passion for this space that you're in now?
Yeah, honestly, this was maybe the last 10 years life purpose, it really started when I realized that I needed to do some of my own work on being ready to be in a relationship. So that became my purpose, is let me figure out like who I am in a relationship and who I want to be, and do I have the skills and tools to do that? And then, I worked with my own therapist, and then I was like, wow, this is so cool that you can actually just learn this stuff. I want to learn it. So then I became a marriage and family therapist because my therapist was a marriage and family therapist. And then I met my husband, and I was like, oh, I really want to like do this well. So that's what has kind of led to this path of purpose over the last, I've been with my husband now 14 years. And I've been a therapist for 10.
The question that comes to mind when you mention that is like, so do therapists have their own therapists?
Yes.
Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah. I was like, I'm thinking to myself, like, how does a therapist give therapy to another therapist? It's almost like, two equal pieces, like kind of in the boxing ring. Like, how do you, that's got to be a very interesting conversation.
It is. And yeah, again, this is kind of the vulnerability piece as well, is personal self-awareness is an ongoing journey. So nobody's ever really quote unquote done, and so being able to recognize that, like, oh, maybe I could use some reflection from another person who's also trained in this, who can maybe call me on my bullshit if I'm trying to, analyze my way out of my emotions, that they can gently therapize me,
That wraps up this episode today. Thank you so much for being here. Where can listeners go to find more about you?
My website is just strong.love. You can find my book, Strong, A Relationship Field Guide for the Modern Man, on Amazon. It's also on Audible because I wanted to make sure it was accessible in that way. And then on Instagram, I'm at ATX Therapist because I'm in Austin, Texas.
Perfect. Listeners, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to DM me on the socials. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I'm very grateful and appreciate you. Thank you so much, Kristal, for joining me here today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.